Hi there, to Richard Little joining you once again with video 59 out of 100 of our series of 100 videos. This is coming from myself, Bryn, and the team at Your Land Partner. You'll mostly see me and Bryn, but a lot of the background work, etc., and a lot of the information is not just us. We don't know as much as it sounds like we probably do. Right. So what we're going to talk about today is planning and the decision notice. Now, there are different types of planning and different types of decision notices, but what we're actually going to concentrate on, which are probably the most common really, which is outline planning and full planning. So we're going to make an assumption that you've done everything else and you're going to get your decision notice come through. Now, you may well know the answer before the decision notice comes through. If the application is being decided by what we call delegated powers, so that's within the council's authorities planning department, then we may well know, because we might have seen the report from the officer. They have to write a report. Sometimes you don't get to see the report. They send you out the decision notice. So the first time you know could be when that email pings you or your agents or whatever, and we open the email. So there are three notices principally that you can get. One is granting, one is refusal, and one is if you've withdrawn. So it's a decision notice, but that's tidying up the paperwork. And generally, if you've withdrawn, you'll know about that one anyway. So let's concentrate on. First of all, we're going to look at outline, a decision on an outline application. So, and I've got some of ours, so it's the real applications, and I've got some refusals and some consents, etc., and some outlines and some fulls. I'm obviously not going to go into all of them, but I think it's useful to understand some of the real conditions that you might have, because what we say to people is, you know, you open that email, you open the letter if you're doing it old school, or you come out of a planning committee where a decision has been made and you have got consent. You have been granted consent. Now, old hands like me just think, okay, that's the next stage. But we do not get overly excited until such time as we have looked at what conditions there may well be, or in the case of outline approval, outline consent, then what reserve matters. So I'm going to go through the outline. So let's just say we've put in an outline application, and any of you that have watched what goes into an outline application, watch the video on that. So we can ask for outline application, just basically in principle, can we build? But we can also ask for certain important aspects of the project to actually be considered and approved with that outline. So I'm going to talk to you about one. The most common one that we get is outline with nothing approved. Right, so and this is one that's very, very similar to that. So this isn't our planning, this is somebody else's planning that we've inherited. So effectively, this was for an outline application for 17 dwellings, so yeah, reasonable size project, etc. And it was granted. However, and I'm not going to pick all of the conditions that go down to number 20, because some of them are pretty standard and they don't really mean too much, but I'm just going to pick out some and read them verbatim in terms of this is what you might get and what it actually means, more importantly. So number one on here is approval of the details of the means of the layout, the scale, the appearance and the landscaping of the site, hereinafter called the reserved matters, shall be obtained from the local planning authority before any development is commenced. So if I read what the granting of the outline permission is for, it's for residential development of up to 17 dwellings. Up to 17 dwellings. Yeah. So it doesn't mean to say there is 17 dwellings. And we have no idea yet of any layouts Okay, that's not a major problem. The scale, so the scale of those dwellings, how big are they going to be? So could they be 17 one-bedroom houses? Quite unusual, but could they be? Or could there be 17 five-bedroom houses? Okay, we have no idea at this point what they're actually doing. And then appearance, we have no idea what they're going to look like. Okay, and landscaping. Well, landscaping might be considered to be probably the most trivial of all of those matters, but the two I want to really talk about is the scale and the appearance. So we've been given consent, or somebody was given consent, for up to 17 dwellings. So we have no idea of how many square foot, how many square meters that we are going to be able to build. How can we value that? So most people that have an ounce of common sense really would sort of say you can't value something that could be 17 two-bedroom homes or 17 five-bedroom homes, or actually could be 10 two-bedroom homes or 10 five-bedroom homes, because it says up to 17. Now, what you'll get is most people will see that and say, well, yeah, we got planning permission for 17 dwellings. But for us, going in to purchase that land, this outline planning permission is relatively worthless. We are going to have to go in with detailed everythings in order to get what we call reserve matters. So reserve matters is just another way of saying conditions. So they grant planning reserving the fact that these other things have still yet to be dealt with. So if you can imagine going back to your planning authority or the relevant planning authority and saying, right, how many can we build then? You've then got to go in with schemes and you basically starting the negotiation from scratch. Now, there'll be a few people watch this and say that's nonsense. It isn't nonsense in my view and my experience. So outline planning permission can be very, very valuable, but more often than not, people go for outline planning permission because it is the least expensive way of gaining paper uplift. Yeah, but what they don't often realise, and particularly when the market's not hot or even warm, is the impact on the value of that. It becomes worth a lot less money to a lot more potential buyers. Yeah. So what they're doing is cutting the market down. So the amount of times that we see outline and we move forward and have moved forward on outline stuff in the past, we nearly always have to change it. So this one, we've got to start again. We have just got to start again. And I'll just give you a few more of the things to watch out for as well. There's loads of if, buts and maybes and all that sort of stuff. The time frame there is that the development permitted shall be begun not later than the expiration of 2 years from the final approval of the reserve matters. Yeah. And they've given you 3 years. So effectively, you've got 5 years if you do the paperwork in the right order. So it can lengthen the planning consent, but you're going to need a lot of months out of the 3 years or the 2 years extension, effectively, to actually work out those reserve matters. So again, lots of sites get done this way because it's relatively, or it's less expensive in terms of gaining that planning consent, but it actually means that anybody's coming in afterwards has got a lot of expenditure here and a lot of unknowns. Yeah. So it's various things here. Right, no work shall commence on site until such time as detailed plans of the roads, footways, cycleways, foul and surface drainage have been submitted and approved. So at this point, we don't know whether it's even possible to do to solve the drainage on site. We have no idea because nobody spent money on the right surveys, etc. So we don't know. So if we're valuing this on a residual basis, we're going to assume that actually, yeah, we probably got to put a lot of extra drainage in. It's going to cost more money, etc. And the key one, because one of the things that we'll assume from the wording of the permission is when you're going for outline consent, the one thing that you're really looking for is access. And because they don't mention that access is not a reserve matter, even I would look at that and think, oh, access is sorted, until you turn over the page, getting down to 10. So this is point 10. It's them telling us that you've got to be able to provide a visibility display measuring 2.3 by 43 metres, which might not mean a lot to many of you, to each side of the axis. So what they're actually saying is, yeah, we're okay with the access, providing you can meet the visibility of a certain criteria. Now, we wouldn't know without going out there that that's actually been done. So without, at first glance of something like this, I mean, we know because we've been working on it for some time, we won't even know whether a topographic survey's been done in order to establish, the visibility that we require, whether it's even achievable. So the one thing you want to find out is actually it's not mentioned, so you could assume that access is okay. So in principle, they're saying that access is okay, providing that visibility and all of the adjacent criteria in respect of your new road joining the existing highway can be met. So you've got to be very, very careful, can it? Brendan and I can tell plenty of stories of sites that we've looked at, and one's recently got permission because they had to go back in because they actually couldn't get the visibility that we said they couldn't get when we looked at it, but it wasn't really of interest to us. Effectively, the site wasn't worth enough, the area wasn't high enough value, but I'm going off piste as I often do. So there's all sorts of, let's say there's 20 on there. Some are pretty standard, etc., management plans and things like that, working hours and things like that. And then there's a whole thing about ecology and the hedgerows. And then there's another one about archaeological works. So we know that this particular site is relatively close to heritage assets, etc. And generally then it means that they're probably going to want some archaeological work. So sort of, that we're going to be doing some investigation. And then once we get the results of the investigation, it could impact our layout on site, etc. So all of a sudden we add another one in there. Again, nothing's really been done. So what it's actually saying is it's another, when we're looking at this from a cost appraisal perspective, it's another unknown. So again, if it's unknown, we assume the worst. So all we're doing on this site is bringing down the value all the time. But of course, what happens in reality, in life, there's a lot of people out there that are a little naive, a little innocent, whatever, just don't know, and end up buying a site and actually getting funding on it as well, because we've got some naive funders and investors out there that don't realise the implications of some of these conditions. So, I mean, I could talk about all of these things, for hours, but I'm not going to. Just giving you an idea of the decisions come in. Yay! Let's break out the champagne. We've got it. But actually, what does that mean? Does that then mean, because if you were going to look to build this out yourself, you've now got a 6 to 12 month process to probably provide all of that information. Let's say on that particular site we're starting again, and actually we'll probably achieve it in full planning between 6 and 12 months. So you're not gained any time particularly. All they're looking to do generally is get some paper value. So be very, very wary of outline planning permissions. So if we move on to a full application, which obviously most of you will know that the full application has got to give a lot more details, but there are also details that are dealt afterwards, and I'm going to go through some of those now. So this is again, these next two decisions are two of ours, and one is a refusal, and this refusal we knew was coming. It wasn't a problem. We were planning for the refusal. We'll talk about that in strategy. I'll try and remember to use this one as perhaps a bit of a story, a bit of a case study as to why that was the case. So this is refusal of planning permission. The application was validated on Christmas Eve 2015, so we snuck it in just before Christmas, but the decision date for a variety of reasons wasn't until July 2017, so that's 19 months. Again, wasn't unexpected. There were some problems with the site, but its refusal, and there was one reason for refusal. So when you get a refusal, sometimes the refusals are really valuable, because what you actually end up, and again, we'll talk about this when we're talking about strategy, if they have refused this planning application, every refusal that they have, if we can then come up with a solution to those refusals, we can resubmit the same application, for free, basically, from an application cost point of view, not the consultants and everything else, but from the actual fee. We can, and if we've combated all of those reasons, if we've counteracted all of those reasons, we'll get consent. even if the local authority or the committee, in this particular case this was committee led, is even if they're against it, because we will take that to appeal, and we are 99% going to get it. Yeah. So there was just one thing here and one reason given, and the proposal fails to meet the requirements for affordable housing either through on-site provision or through the provision of a commuted sum, which is a payment towards off-site provision of a level which has been independently assessed to be viable for the proposed scheme. Basically, we didn't agree with the numbers. We did not agree with, we were looking to pay a commuted sum. They wanted, I can't remember exact figures, they wanted something like $500,000. That just made the project not viable. So we looked at this and took it, took it a bit further. We got consent for that same scheme. Absolutely everything about it was the same. We had to go through an appeals process and everything else, and hearings and all that sort of stuff, but we actually got consent for the same scheme, exactly the same scheme, and I think the contribution, and again, don't quote me, but I think it's closer to 200 grand than it was 500,000, and at 200,000 at the time it was viable. Now, not quite so sure, but at the time it was. So the lesson, if you like, here is, if you get a refusal, okay, what does that mean? So we always plan to get refusals. We always expect to get refusals. We don't want them, but we would plan for a refusal because we don't want any last minute shocks. Whether for some of you got investors' money or even finance sometimes, there's a few ways to finance this stuff, without planning. I mean, most finance is coming in, after planning of some sort, but there are ways. So you may have people expecting a result. You may well have planned things out. You might have even got, some cases, a contractor lined up to come and build it. Yeah, this happens all the time, and all of a sudden you've got a refusal. A refusal should never really be unexpected. I'm not saying there aren't stories out there, and I've heard a few that, you just think, wow, the hell did that come from? But generally you should be expecting it, and you should really know what those reasons are. So if something is going to committee, for instance, whether it be outline or full, then there will be an officer's report that will be released, sometimes not very many hours before the actual committee meeting. Sometimes it's a week before, etc. And you'll have an idea where the stance of the planning department are. Now, they may well be suggesting that it is going to be, or they're going to suggest and recommend that it is approved, or they may be recommending that it's refused. That either of whatever ways they go doesn't mean to say that the committee might not overturn either of those directions. But it's very important for us to understand. So the officer's report, generally most of the stuff in the officer's report ends up as conditions in your consent, whether it's for outline or whether it's for full planning consent. So we have an idea of what's going to be missing. So that's a refusal. One reason. You might have 5 reasons, and we're okay. We look at stuff specifically that has been refused. We look at the reasons why it's been refused. We'll then have a little look and say, right, can we go in with that? Can we change it? And you will be amazed how much stuff gets left on the table. Typically a landowner might be funding it themselves. They may have got an architect, planning consultant on board. Nothing necessarily wrong with the people that are doing it, but they underinvest in terms of the application. They don't do the correct reports and surveys, so they come up with lots of reasons which are basically saying, you haven't given us enough information, so by default it's a no. Now that sort of makes sense. So you're here, and maybe you might have been guilty of it, if you like, in the past, of saying this is desperately unfair. We've been refused planning consent. There aren't many times that when we look into that we couldn't have predicted it. Not because we're super clever in any way, or even not even super clever, even clever. We don't need to. We've just seen it before, and so we've got a damn good idea what the result is going to be. So there's a lot of opportunity there, but we're not here today to talk about opportunity, but massive opportunity in refused planning permissions. So the sort of the last one that we're going to spend any amount of time talking about really is planning permission, full application is granted. So this particular one was That was an application, again, giving you an idea in terms of time frames. These are real time frames, they're not target time frames. Validated in June 18, decided September 19. So again, what's that, 15 months or so? Something like that. Now, these are the real times that some take. Now, these take a little bit more because this is another one that was subject of an appeal, etc., etc., and some third party. Another one that actually supported by the planning authority, but not by certain members of the committee. We'll talk about committees absolutely another day. We'll have a whole video on committees, I think. If I forget, let us know. Right, so here we have conditions. Now, different authorities lay this out thing. So this is consent, planning permission, subject to these conditions. And what they have to do with each condition is they have to give you a reason why that condition's in place. Because you may well have received planning permission, but you may well want to appeal against some of the conditions. So we want to know what the condition is and what the reason is. Now, this particular authority do their condition and reasons as they go through. Other authorities will do all the conditions, list all the conditions, and then list all the reasons. Either way, the result is the same. So typically on this one, the first one here is the development hereby permitted shall be begun before the expiration of 3 years from the date of this permission. Now, that's pretty standard these days. It is 3 years. You know, we used to have 5 years, a good few years ago, but pretty much everything now we ever see is 3 years. So if you do not commence this project, this whatever it might be, house, conversion, big site, whatever, it doesn't really matter. If you've not substantially started that, yeah, and that generally means work in the ground, foundations and that sort of stuff. Once you've done that, once you've actually made a substantial start, then that permission is there. It's there forever. Yeah. So that's what people look to do really. If you're getting towards the end, your 3 years is running out, make a substantial start. Sometimes we've had a few lately where demolition is considered to be a substantial start, but we know certain local planning authorities that won't allow that. It's got to be a substantial start of the new development, and the clearance they don't count. So 3 years, got to be mindful of that. So let's see. I'm not going to read them all. Right. Okay. So on this particular one, it's a larger scheme. So they wanted no development should take place until the development phasing plan has been submitted to and agreed by local planning authority in writing. So that's looking, and the phasing has to include all of the areas, the access, the roads, the landscaping, any communal or any sort of site-wide, scheme-wide surface drainage, etc. So they want to know, how are you going to build this? You know, are you going to build half the road for half of the units and then build the other half? So you have to agree all of this, yeah. So where have we got here? Normal ecology things, bat surveys, etc. Although on this particular application it was all provided, they still put in a condition in there, which is nonsensical really, but actually we'd already satisfied that condition. But so we're not really worry about that. There was some demolition on that one, so they want things like construction method statements, and they want to do all that before you start. So you want written approval before you start. Will you get away with it if you start without the written approval? Sometimes, but it's a bit risky. Not something we would ever suggest you do. Yeah. Where are we here? Down to 6. So this one was a locally listed building, and we're doing quite a bit of demolition on it, or actually on this particular one the demolition has all been done, etc., etc. But they wanted a photographic record of all the buildings on the site. So that's quite onerous actually, because and so hundreds of photographs, I suspect, don't know, I'm not bothered looking at them, but would have been done, and they have to be submitted and approved and everything else, and then they'll say, oh, you haven't got enough photos from that angle and all this sort of stuff. So stuff and nonsense in many ways, but it's important to somebody, so it's about tick box. So these are the sort of things that you need to do. what else have we got? Oh, whole drainage thing. Now, because this site was virtually completely built over, so very little sort of external space. We had some drainage surveys on it, but we weren't able to do all of the detailed surveys and reports, investigations in order to actually confirm what the drainage would really look like. And part of the site was in a flood risk area, so there's a whole thing there. No drainage work shall take place on site until detailed designs of surface water drainage scheme incorporating the following measures, and then it lists the whole of the rest of the page and the part of the next one on all of these critical things. Now, we knew that was coming because we knew we have to provide that, but we couldn't actually provide it beforehand. So nothing there was unreasonable for us. What have we got here? Part demolition, a bit more stuff about demolition. So nothing there. There's a few pages of this, by the way. What have we got here? Right, yeah. So the whole standard thing sometimes is right. Okay, to ensure that before the first use on site, details of the following materials in any phase should be submitted. External bricks, including details of the manufacturer, product, colour and finish, including a sample. Right. Now, not too much brickwork going on here, but they still want it all, tick box. They want to know what the brick bond is going to be, so how the bricks are laid on top of each other, if you like, and what the mortar mix is going to be, so what colour is it going to be, and things like that. They want to know all the details of the rainwater goods, yeah, so quite a lot of detail, yeah, and you've got to do all this stuff, so, you know, that's fair enough. And large scale drawings of some metal fretwork that we'd included in some of the elevations, glass things, all sorts of details on pipes, flues, yeah. All section drawings on all new external joinery, etc. This is partly because it's a conversion. A lot more work in this stuff on a conversion. If this was a new build, wouldn't be quite so many. So it's another reason most of you know that we steer away from conversions. Oh, there's a stained glass window that's going to be changed in this particular one. So a whole method statement for removing it and the reinstallation in a new location and all that. So again, extra work. But, you know, it's all been priced in. Where we get all the details of the hard landscaping. So this is a full application where we have given them considerable details, yeah. But obviously, some of the details still to be decided. Soft landscaping. So there's a whole page a whole page on soft landscaping. Then we've got to look at all the renewable energies. So we've put forward that we will meet a certain quota that they want in that area. So then, fair enough, we say not unexpected, they then want to know exactly how we're going to do that. So an issue here that you can have for people that put this stuff in, yeah, and I'll refer to two examples really, renewable energy and also what was the other one I was going to use? I've forgotten what the other one I was going to use was now. Oh, let's do the renewable energy. I might have remembered it. So, you know, renewable energy, and it's right, actually, can you achieve it? Yeah, can you actually achieve what you're saying you can? Because on the paperwork and on the drawing, do you know what? We can achieve anything. Can we actually achieve it, and how are we going to do that? That's very often down to detailed design. So where there's anything that's crucial like that, we will have already spoken with contractors, subcontractors, whichever route we're necessarily going to establish, can we really do this? Now, we can make it work on paper and in theory. Hey, I've seen many schemes, many details, many building regulation drawings, many specifications, all saying this and that, but actually we can't achieve that. We've now got to look at a different way, a different solution. So what you want to be mindful of these conditions is, can they actually be met? Yeah, I don't really remember what the other one was. Drainage strategy, I referred to it earlier. So can you actually achieve the sufficient drainage, on-site drainage, and if you can't get on-site drainage, can you get permission for off-site drainage for surface water? It's a massive thing these days, yeah? And don't underestimate it by just assuming that, we'll be able to just put the water into the current system. That might not be possible. I mean, seriously, might not be possible. So we've seen, not many, but we've seen schemes that can't go ahead in their permitted design because we can't achieve the on-site stroke off-site stormwater drainage. So it's not your toilet stuff, it's the rain, yeah, and you can't do it. And we're, I'm not saying we shouldn't be concentrating on that with global warming and all that sort of stuff, but this is a whole layer of paperwork that your planning consent might say you've got it, but you've still got to prove that you can do it. And as the developer or the investor or the funder on a project like that, you want to make sure that it can be done. Because what if it can't? Or it's going to cost another 100,000 or 10,000, depending on the scale of the project. So I'm not going to take you through all of these because there are quite a lot and it is quite a long thing. So yeah, another highways thing there, heritage stuff. There wasn't anything on this when it came through. So actually there are, it's not too bad, there are only 17 conditions. Now, what I'm going to do now is to finish up talking about conditions and reserve matters. Now, reserve matters, if you remember, that they're associated with outline planning consent, but effectively they're still conditions, but they are very much more onerous than the conditions that you will generally find on a full planning consent. So those conditions, reserve matters, have to be satisfied. So you're going to have to go through the process. Now that is going to be a lot of paperwork, a lot of to and froing generally between your consultants and the local authority to establish how much of that has to be done before you start on site. So there will be what we call pre-commencement conditions. Yeah, in the respect of full planning, they have got to be done before you get on site. Again, can you get away with it? In reality, yeah, you can get away with one or two or even more than that in some local authorities, and you pick it up later on. But it's a bit of a risk unless you know what you're doing, yeah? In terms of reserve matters, then very few of those, most of that stuff in there is pre-commencement, because we've got to decide how many houses, what they're going to look like and how big they are before we can actually start. So that's logical, yeah? But the point about this is whether you are satisfying planning conditions or you are making an application for reserve matters, the point is both of those are an application. So it's an application to discharge conditions or approve reserve matters. So there's fees, there's time, so all of these things take time. So when you get your planning consent, your full planning consent, let's look at the conditions before we pop the champagne. It is a lovely moment, but we, the old hands, if you like, let's read what it says before we go yes. Yeah, as I say, generally we'll know what the conditions are going to be prior to us receiving them, so we'll already really know, and we'll already really know the decision, or more often than not, we know the decision. But you don't jump up and down, yeah. And the other thing here, and I'm going to sort of finish this off really, in terms of any of you that are purchasing sites, or funding or investing in sites that have planning consents, outline or full. Same thing I'm not going to talk about today, but the same thing, it works with prior approval, etc. Does all the paperwork, does it all tie up? Is this stuff all deliverable? Yeah, and is it deliverable within the time frames? Because one thing that you're going to get when you get onto bigger schemes is that your planning will not actually be valid. And this is particularly where there are what we talked about Section 106 before, not just in respect of affordable housing, but there will be a Section 106, which is a legal agreement. So your planning won't actually be in place until that 106 is signed. Now, we use that process to lengthen our planning, if you like. We can do, but that's another story for another day. But you've got to be mindful that is all of this deliverable? So don't get super excited. Let's understand the implications, the impact, the potential impact of any reserve matters or conditions that need discharging. Yeah, and hey, I'm not here to rain on somebody's parade, as it were, but I'm just trying to sort of say, look at it. So if you're purchasing, if it's your own site and you've got a plan in, or you're purchasing one, you go through this with a fine tooth comb, as my dad would have said years ago. Because it's so crucial, and you seriously, very few of you would believe the amount of projects that are not deliverable, but they've got planning consent. Yeah, full planning consent. It's all about the conditions. ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, it really is. And I don't matter how many times I bang on about it, I still will get, I don't know, 1, 2 a month that come on and say, oh, can we have a look at this? Can we have a look at that? Or are you interested in this? And we'll say, well, what about this? You know, and they're red lights for us. You know, they're certainly dark amber. We just sort of say, look, you know, it's not of interest to us because that is a massive unknown.